Well, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. We're just waiting for a minute or so for the delegates to join us. My name is Ian McKechnie. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Advanced Services Group, and I will be the host today. So if you just bear with us for a minute or so, we'll bring in the audience and then we'll start from there. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon and good morning, wherever you're based. My name is Ian McKechnie. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Advanced Services Group. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to our Driving Servitization Success with B2B Voice of the Customer Skills webinar. We've got two specialists with us today who I will introduce shortly. But to give people time just to join us and get settled, I'll give you a little bit of background about the Advanced Services Group. We will finish bang on the hour, and I hope you enjoy what we've got. We have a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to use that to post questions at any time throughout the webinar, and Dan Parikshit and myself will do the best to answer these as we get towards the end of the session. So a little bit about the Advanced Services Group, first of all. It moved to the, let me just take it back. Right, I tell you what, I'll change the order slightly. I'll give you the agenda first. So I'm going to do the introduction. Parikshit will then give us some context about the voice of the customer and how that plays into the role of supporting servitization. Then Dan Adams will give us a really insightful analysis of the importance of B2B and how to use voice of the customer correctly. And then we'll have some closing remarks and questions and answers at the end of the session. The speakers that we've got today, so Parikshit, if I introduce him first, he's Business Development Manager at the Advanced Services Group. He completed his PhD with Aston Business School a few years back. And his PhD was on the topic of investigating the goal-oriented use of Internet of Things and servitization. So he has a very clear role in the use of digital and using that as an enabler to servitize within your business. And he currently mentors a number of global firms on this topic. We're also delighted to have Dan Adams with us. You can see the president of the AIM Institute. So Dan is the author of New Product Blueprinting. He also runs a blog called Awkward Realities. He also has a video series called B2B Organic Growth. He's a chemical engineer by training. He has many patents. He's listed in the National Register in the US as an inventor in the Hall of Fame. He uses B2B innovation methods, and he has trained tens of thousands of people globally to help them understand how to get more from the voice of the customer process. So delighted that both Parikshit and Dan are with us today. A little bit about our centre. We're a centre of excellence in servitization research and practice. The gentleman you can see on the screen now is Professor Tim Baines, our Executive Director. And Tim leads our group of about 20 scholars at Aston Business School, and we work very closely with Parikshit and his colleagues at the Advanced Services Group. We work with industry really to help them grow. So we have the research engine on the Aston side at the Advanced Services Group, and Parikshit sits in the Advanced Services Group Limited, where he builds and creates and shares the intellectual property that evolves from the research. Some of the businesses we've worked with probably 350 or so small businesses over the last 10 years on this topic. And we have worked significantly with global businesses over the last 7 or 8 years. Some of the firms you can see and perhaps recognize their names on the screen there. But they all have one thing in common. They want to grow the businesses. They want to get more intimate with the customers, and they want to make their customers more successful. Hence why Dan and Parkshire are helping us today to explain and define that in a better way. The big elephant in the room, a lot of people don't know what servitization means, and when they do, they don't know how to start. And then when they find out how to start, they don't necessarily know how to go about it correctly. And Parikshit is now going to take us through the Advanced Services Group perspective before handing over to Dan. So thanks, Parikshit, over to you.
Thanks, Ian, and thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody joining us from all around the world. Thank you very much for joining and giving us your time. So to get into a bit more detail on, of course, servitization, advanced services, and today's topic, which is voice of customer, we'll start with what really is a business model when we talk about advanced services, and how does that change in this transformation process of servitization. So servitization, the transformation of product-led businesses going away from just providing products to delivering services, especially complex services around guaranteeing outcomes from the product instead of just ownership of the product. And through this transformation, typically the product-led business will change its business model or create a separate business model that it wants to start growing slowly. Now, this business model, for those who have been listening to us previously, you have probably seen this before. The business model is broken down into typically 4 components. On the top left-hand side is the value proposition, which talks about how do you create value. The top right-hand side talks about value delivery system. This involves the resources and competencies required to deliver the value you have created. Then comes the value capture process, which means how do you earn money? How do you earn other forms of value from the value proposition that you are driving? And finally, as a combination of the previous 3 boxes, we are looking at creating a competitive advantage. Of course, at the end of the day, it is about differentiating yourself as a product-led business to become something very different, to not be in the market competing on the cheapest product or the best performance product, but rather being the best solution provider or the best package supplier here. So looking at these 4 quadrants or the 4 mechanisms of a business model, they all are driven by what is the customer value proposition you are developing. When Ian and I work with companies, very often businesses think because it's 4 quadrants, this is 25% of time spent on each quadrant. If I ask Ian right now, he would probably say, no, you would rather spend 60% of your time designing the right value proposition, and the rest of the things will fall in place. The delivery systems are not radically new. These are driven by what you already have. The value capture process is very much driven by the value you demonstrate in your value proposition. So how do we design these value propositions, and what do these value propositions look like? We can compare that to the services staircase that we very commonly use. Value propositions in the advanced services world look at the top 3 steps, where we are guaranteeing customer asset capability, or we are guaranteeing the process outcome from the use of that asset, or we are guaranteeing the platform capability, the entire business performance for our customer. The end goal really here is to make the customer more successful. And in order to do that, the product-led businesses tend to use all of the other steps as well. So it is a step-by-step incremental innovation of combining products, product spares, product break fix, every single step that you see on this staircase. It is a combination of those to deliver a solution that guarantees outcomes to the customer. As you go up on this staircase, of course, you are creating more value, as you can see on the y-axis. But at the same time, you're absorbing more risk on the x-axis. Now, this risk might be better placed with you rather than with the customers, who are maintaining and operating the product for them might not be the core business function. Their business function is using the outcome of your product to finally deliver whatever their business is. So de-risking the customer's business, adding more value, it's quite a complex value proposition. And at this stage, you don't want to be making any mistakes. these value propositions should be really anchored and grounded in what the customer really needs, what we call the customer pains and gains. And this brings us to a very valid and widely tested process of value proposition design. You can find more of this process on our mini guide, which is called Customer Value Propositions for Servitization, which is available on our shop as well on the website. What it really takes you through is a 7-step process of starting with the right customers and delivering them the right value propositions. Step 1, here we talk about selecting the right customer. Here we spend a lot of time, or businesses tend to spend a significant amount of time segmenting their existing markets. Key point about servitization and advanced services is these services are not for all your customers. You have to pick the right customer segments that are going to react positively and whose needs you can truly address. So in order to do that, we conduct a segmentation exercise. Then we go deeper into, now let's pick a few customers in this segment that we have chosen that truly represent the needs of that entire segment. And you want to pick the customers that are almost brand ambassadors of your product. They really believe in you, and they would let you even make some mistakes and it wouldn't affect your relationship badly. And then you follow the rest of the process, which involves conducting interviews, understanding their pains and gains, which means understanding what elements are bringing their business down and what elements can improve their business performance, and then relating that to your own capabilities as a product-led business. Which of these can you empathize with, and which of these can you address, create a new value proposition? And as you can see, the process is very co-creative. You don't do this in isolation, but you do this with the customer. And this is where I think voice of customer plays an absolutely critical role. And the idea of voice of customer has been around for a while, just like segmentation. The concept of segmentation has been around for more than 5 decades. But when it comes to acknowledging the importance of voice of customer, understanding the processes behind it, and being very well versed with the interviewing techniques and unlocking the pains and gains, voice of customer can be absolutely critical. And the more and more we have been working with businesses, we have found out how many businesses lack these skills and would really appreciate more specific support on this and how it can drive success in servitization as well. And at this point, I would like to introduce a true expert on voice of customer. And Dan, if you would like to please tell us a bit more about what you have learned in the world of voice of customer.
Great. Thank you so much, Parijit. I really appreciate it. And I really like your perspective on spending 60% of the effort on designing the customer value proposition. We actually asked this question in a lot of our workshops, and most people respond about 10 to 20% is where most people are in terms of how much time they're thinking about the customer value proposition. So what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of pick up where Parijit left off, which is now how do we actually do this? We'll cover some research that shows how impactful it is to do good VOC in terms of driving new product success. We'll take a look at about a dozen different skills involved in voice of customer, and then we'll get into a little bit of real practical, what's it actually look like when you're doing this well. Now, one caveat here. I say new product success. If an insurance agent came over to your house and said, oh, I've got a really good new product for you and your spouse, you might be looking around for a physical article and you wouldn't see one. So he or she meant a service. So when I use the word product, it could be a physical article. It could absolutely be a service. It could be an entirely new business model. Really, the methodology that we're going to talk about is agnostic as to the type of solution. So it definitely applies to servitization. So let's take a look at our agenda. We'll cover a brief overview here of this research we've done, and then we'll see if market needs lead to new product success, VOC competencies, voice of customer competencies, lead to understanding market needs, and then if VOC training leads to VOC competencies before we wrap this up. So if you start at the end and say, we really want to have new product success, and again, that could be a service. Let's back this all the way up and see if all these things actually make a difference. Another way of looking at this is we're going to go through 4 boxes. And if you remember this, this will probably help you. If we get training, does it help us with our skills or competencies? And does that help us understand market needs better? And does that help us obviously develop the right customer value proposition and have new product success? Now, what we're going to find is strong correlations everywhere we looked. And I'll share some of the charts on this. I can't share everyone given the time we've got. By the way, we will allow time for Q&A at the end. So jot your questions down if you have any, and we'll cover them at the end. But we'll hit some of the main points here. To be clear, we're not claiming causation. I don't know how you'd even put that experiment together. We are just showing very strong correlation, probably strong enough that should not be ignored. So we're going to cover these 12 B2B VOC skills. And by the way, there's a lot more to this research than I can cover. So get your pen ready. We'll make, in fact, here it is right now. If you want to get the full research report, go out to www.b2bvocskills.com, download the whole report, and then you don't have to listen to me the rest of this webinar this way. So we had about over 300 responses in the research that we did here, lots of experience. Now, when we looked at these 12 VOC skills, we put them on this scale. As you move up vertically, the respondents said something was more important to them, okay? So for instance, in this case, they said the most important one was number 10, the ability to prioritize customer needs. I'm going to come back to that one later. That's pretty important. And then if you look across the horizontal axis, this is how satisfied they were with their skills. And as you can, whoops, a little too fast there. As you see, most people were between barely acceptable on their skill level and good. Okay, that was the average responses we had here. Now, let's take a look at that box number 3, understanding market needs, and any correlation to box number 4, new product success. So we had a lot of people self-report that their understanding of market needs was very poor or poor. These are very humble survey respondents. Now, what's all that red in there? Well, that red is these were the people who also self-reported that when they were working on a new product development project, the chances of it succeeding were less than half. Or another way of saying it, fewer than half of their projects they were on were successful. So you don't want these people on your new project team, right? Now, we had some other people who self-reported their understanding of market needs was good or high on the right side. And in this case, 70% of these people said that more often than not, when they're working on new product development, it's going to be a glorious success. So to put this in perspective, imagine you've got 100 market-facing people in your business. You've got marketing and product management, and you've got R&D and technical support and sales. Now, of these 100 people, do you want to have 5 of them with a winning new product track record, or do you want to have 70 of them? And if the answer is, I'd rather have 70, thank you very much, then what we want to do is get to the point where you've got a lot of people understanding market needs. Now, I'm going to come back in a little bit to see how do we actually get there with VOC skills. But first, while we're on this, should this surprise us? Not really. 5 decades ago, the leading cause of new product failure was inadequate market analysis, just not understanding customer needs. 5 decades later, the same thing is true. The main reason new products fail is just not understanding the market. So you can have technical success or technical risk rather with a product. Can we really make this thing work, the solution? But our point is it's probably more critical to resolve the commercial risk. And we believe you can resolve almost all of the commercial risk in the front end of your new product development process. So if you got a stage gate process and you get this money gate where you go into development and push back the frontiers of modern science, you really shouldn't have hardly any commercial risk when that stage begins. We'll talk a little more about how you do that. So imagine this. Imagine you want to lower commercial risk. Let's start with the highest possible level of commercial risk and see how to drive it down. So the highest level is guess what customers want. Now, before you chortle at that ridiculous level, be aware that this is actually what most B2B companies are doing. They're coming up with great solutions and saying, yeah, we think customers are going to like this. Now, if you want to lower the risk a little bit, you ask your sales reps what they want. That helps a little. And then maybe what you do is you go ask your favorite customer, Joe, at your favorite account, Joe, what do you think the market wants? If you want to lower it more, now it really starts dropping. You talk to many job functions at many customer accounts. Then maybe even go to your customers and the entire ecosystem with influencers and regulators and co-suppliers. Now, I don't have time to explain this. Let me know if you want to talk about this at the end. But instead of going in with a questionnaire, B2B companies should let the customers lead the interview. And they should also use advanced probing to understand not just what customers want, but why they want it. And then trigger some fresh thinking. There's lots of methods that can be applied, especially in B2B. And then you can observe during customer tours, something that Parikshit mentioned. And then finally, we strongly recommend you conduct quantitative interviews. And I'll explain this in a minute, but this is how you prioritize customer needs. So that's how we lower commercial risk. Now, if you remember, the second box was VOC competencies, and the third box was understanding market needs. So let's take a look at that. So what we did here is we averaged all 12 of the VOC skills. Now, if you were a respondent in red group 1 or red group or orange group 2 over in that legend there, that means that you self-reported your understanding of market needs was very poor or somewhat poor. Also turns out that you would have said on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, your skills were barely acceptable. Very humble of you. Now, if you were in the good or the 4 good or the 5 high, the blue or the purple, in terms of understanding market needs, you would have on average self-reported your skills were good. Now, what we see, of course, here is a correlation horizontally between understanding market needs and VOC competencies. But notice there is also a rising level of importance. So the attitude is changing as your understanding of market needs and your skills are changing. There's a greater appreciation for this. So what does this mean? It means you want your competitors over here. You want them unskilled, uninterested, and guessing. But that's not where you want to be, okay? So let's move on and take a look at what I think is probably the most compelling chart. We have these 12 VOC skills. Do some matter more than the others? Yeah, they actually do. Let's take a look at secure interviews up at the top. What does that faded bar mean, the faded red bar? Well, these were people who reported that when they did new product development, they were rarely successful. The medium bar said, oh, about half the time we're successful. And the dark red bar said, hey, we are usually successful. Oh, now this lets us understand if there's some differentiation between highly successful and highly unsuccessful new product developers. And what we find is the strongest differentiator by far is the ability to prioritize customer needs. So on average, those who were rarely successful in new product development, they averaged a 4, which is even below the 5, barely acceptable. They were aspiring to barely acceptable, okay? Those who actually were usually successful in new product development, their ability to prioritize customer needs was above good. Not bad, right? Okay, so we once again see the importance of prioritizing. Let's do a quick process check. So we're okay here. We looked at that correlation. We looked at this correlation, and we just got done looking at this correlation. We don't have time to go into all the rest of them, but we will look at one more here. Let's go all the way from if we get training in voice of customer skills, could that lead to better understanding of market needs, which we know correlates with new product success? Let's take a look. So we had some people who responded, hey, I've had some training in other methods like design for Six Sigma. In that case, about 20% of them were in the green, which means they were saying they had a good or high understanding of market needs. If they had extensive training in other methods, then 40% were there. Now, I'll explain what new product blueprinting is in a little bit. But if they had some training in blueprinting, that was similar to extensive training. And if they had extensive training in blueprinting, well, now 4 out of 5 of them were in really good shape. So that's what our company does, the AIM Institute. We take people from the left column over to the right column. Now, new product blueprinting is something we've been training to B2B companies for 18 years. My apologies to you if you are selling to end consumers. These methods generally aren't well adapted to that, but they are optimized for selling to companies where the people you're talking to are engineers and chemists and professionals, and they've got high knowledge, interest, objectivity, foresight, and in some cases, high industry concentration. There's not that much of them. These are huge advantages to the B2B supplier, but an advantage is no advantage unless we take advantage of it. So the methodology that I'll very briefly share with you is one that takes advantage of all these B2B customer knowledge and advantages, competencies. So here's how it works in a nutshell. Let's imagine you make ingredients that go into paint, okay? So who are you going to interview? Well, you'll interview paint producers. Now, when you do a discovery interview, you're going to project your notes, and there's ways of letting the customer lead, but your main objective is to uncover as many customer outcomes as possible. Now, when I say an outcome, it's a desired end result. It often starts as a problem, but maybe they want better hiding power, or better paint scrub resistance, or crayon removal. Your job in discovery is to go out to several companies, engage them visually, let them lead the interview, and get literally dozens and dozens of customer outcomes not prioritized yet at this point, okay? Now you're going to go back and you're going to do quantitative preference interviews. And you're going to ask questions like this. Well, how important is hiding power on a scale of 1 to 10? And how satisfied are you with your hiding power today on a scale of 1 to 10? And you're hoping to get some outcomes that score high in importance and low in current satisfaction. That's the only thing somebody's going to pay you a premium for, is something that's important to them that they're not getting today. So what are we doing? We're diverging to all the outcomes, and then we're converging to the ones that really matter. Now, the reason we do this is there are 2 principal ways of messing up new product development in the early stages. The first one is called an error of omission. An error of omission is failing to uncover an unarticulated need. You go develop your new service or your new product, whatever it may be. Oh, we missed an important outcome. Oh, man. No team has ever faulted for that at the time because nobody knows they omitted it. Now, that's handled in discovery. In the quantitative preference interviews, you're going to stop errors of commission. An error of commission is picking the wrong thing to build into your value proposition, the wrong outcomes, and committing to those in your new design. That happens all the time. Now, what are we going to do with this? Well, we developed something years ago, 20 years ago now, called the market satisfaction gap. And basically, you take the average market importance, let's say it's a 9, you take the average market satisfaction, let's say it's a 6, and you go importance times 10 minus satisfaction. 9 times 10 minus 6, 36%. And we've done this with thousands of teams around the world. And what we know is if you get a gap of around 30% or more, this is your indication that the market is eager for you to work on it. So what do you do in your value proposition that Parrot mentioned earlier? You really just work on stuff with high market satisfaction gaps. Don't waste your time on stuff they don't care about. Either it's not important to them or they already have it satisfied and you don't need to improve that. So this is the way we reduce commercial risk, and you can eliminate almost all of it in the front end. The step I just described, the preference interviews combined with market satisfaction gap, this is how you prioritize customer needs. And remember that as we go into a little more research, and actually the surprise at the end, surprise to me at the end, we'll talk about. So we did some more research and we asked our client teams who had gone through all these interviews, well, how much did they really impact your product design? Now, it turned out that 1 out of 6 said, it was moderate or slight. These folks were probably on the right track. However, 5 out of 6 teams said, oh my goodness, these interviews had a great or significant impact. It's not a reach to suspect that these people would have designed a different product had they not done these interviews. So if your boss says, hey, I wonder how we're doing, I wonder how many of our teams understand market needs, tell your boss to envision a 6-sided die with only 1 yes on it. That's how most companies are doing, unless they take the effort to get some training and do better. So how do you do this for insight? Well, it's actually the same steps you take to engage the customer. If you're in B2B and you have a concentrated market, that is not, maybe you don't have thousands of B2B customers, maybe you've got tens or 100 or 2. You want to engage them and impress them like you're the customer, you're the supplier they want to do business with. Can't go into a lot of detail here, but stay away from the questionnaire which just bores people. Signal ideation, use sticky notes so they go, oh, I got to generate ideas. Let the customers lead that by telling you about their problems and then saying, what else? Display your notes so they can actually follow along and correct them. Focus on customer outcomes. Don't talk about solutions during these meetings. It's premature. Focus on their job to be done. You want to talk about the hole they want to drill, not about your drill bit and the alloy and metal hardness, okay? Don't sell or solve during these interviews. Probe intelligently. We developed a method called the what and why probing method. It really gets to the essence of what they want. And then use triggers to trigger more ideas. Walk through their process and ask, how could we do each of these steps faster, better, cheaper? And then get quantitative. Here's where you would put up here and ask them to score on a scale of 1 to 10. How important and how satisfied are you with this particular outcome? So those are ways to engage customers. Now, a few more things and we'll go into the Q&A. A few other research findings here. So what really drives VOC skills? So is it company size? We checked this across many different companies and the answer is no, not really. Does it matter if they make a service or a material or a component or a fully assembled piece of equipment? No, it doesn't. The data doesn't show that there's any real difference there. Does it matter if the people responding were in R&D versus marketing versus operations or technical or even management? No, not really. Does it matter if they have had training at their company? Oh yeah, a lot. This is a huge differentiator. And does it matter if they're actually using VOC at their company on a regular basis? That matters a lot. Now, I think this is completely encouraging. Why do I say that? Well, because you're probably not going to change your company size overnight or your type of offerings or your job function. Those are kind of what they are. It's not difficult to change the last 2. You can get training and you can make a decision to boost your use of voice of customer in your new product development. These are controllable by you. So here's the surprise that came at the end. I was not expecting this. So we have all these skills, right? Can we secure the interviews? Can we get the right people in the room? Can we impress the customer so they say afterwards, ooh, I want to work with that supplier? Can we get all of their needs? Can we probe to understand what the meaning is, why, what it is? And can we probe to understand what the value will be delivered? Can we do quantitative voice of customer? Can we do this virtually? Do we have to always do it in person or can we do it virtually? Can we debrief really effectively afterwards? Here's a big one. Can we prioritize needs? And the way we do this in blueprinting is with a quantitative preference interview and market satisfaction gaps. Can we segment markets? Now that one seems a little odd. Let me explain that one for a moment. Wait a minute, Dan, you just go out there and just get any kind of data and then segment later? No, we really don't. We tell our clients, do the best job you can of segmenting your market up front and try to get a cluster of customers of similar needs. That's what a market segment is, right? And also identify their job to be done. So you identify the cluster of customers is all paint producers, and the job to be done are those who are creating semi-gloss paint for indoor use, okay? So you identify that and you do your best possible job of market segmentation. Then, though, you also can use your VOC data. If it's quantitative, you can parse the data a little bit more. Maybe some of these in high humidity situations want this and others in low humidity want that. Or maybe bathroom painting versus the basement painting or something else. I don't know. But you can do more segmentation, a refinement of your segmentation based upon. So that's what this one is. Last one is, can we put together a good business case that lets us go through the gate in our stage gate process to begin the heavy duty development? So those are the 12. So which of these should you focus on the most? They all matter, but some matter more than others. So what we found was, of all these skills, the one that was rated most important, I think you saw that was at number 10, prioritize customer needs. The one that the unskilled respondents were most eager to improve, well, that was also prioritize customer needs. The one that was the biggest differentiator in understanding market needs, prioritize customer needs. The biggest differentiator in new product success, I think you saw that chart, prioritize customer needs. And the one that improved the most with voice of customer training was prioritize customer needs. So those are some of the things that we saw in the research. So I think now, it's time for Q&A, and Ian and I have talked about this. Hit us with your questions. Ian, you're going to take the hard ones and I'm going to take the easy ones. Isn't that what we decided?
That's what we did, Dan. Yeah, thank you. But first of all, let me just thank you for such an insightful presentation. That was really helpful, and we put some links into the chat function just to see where the segmentation works with the voice of the customer and how it's so important as part of that wider servitization transformation that businesses go through. So perhaps to give you a chance to rest your voice after your session there, I'll start with Parikshit, Dan, if I may. Parikshit, what would be your advice to any business seeking to take a new service to market? How would you advise a firm to do that, perhaps based on the conversations today?
Interesting, very interesting question, Ian. I think the first step to do is what Dan was speaking about towards the end of the presentation as well, is to find the right customers. Pick the ones that are going to really value the services. And it's not about having the service ready already, but it is about finding the right ones that would co-create a service with you. And then look at conducting voice of customer exercises to get deeper into their pains and gains. So again, coming to what are the pains and gains? Pains are factors that are bringing down their business performance, and gains are potential opportunities to elevate their business performance. So in order to unlock this, these are very honest and transparent conversations. They don't happen with everyone. You need to, that's why, find the right customers and the right segments. Now, segmentation and the way of segmenting, whether it's traditional, behavioral, regional, these have existed extensively in the B2C area, and which is why B2B needs a more bespoke, a more nuanced approach. And that's where I think businesses should really focus. Start with finding the right customers, asking the right questions to the right people in those businesses, and then unlocking those pains and gains. So the process that we have spoken very much sits at the foundation of launching a new service for a business.
Okay, fabulous. I'm going to pass to you now, Dan, if I may, but can I just for we've got a question coming through on the Q&A. So Dan, I'll ask you my question first, and then I'll drop to that one, and then we can see who's best placed. Why do you think prioritized market needs was such a prominent VOC skill? Any insight you can share there?
A very good question. I've wrestled with this, trying to sort this out. And here's where I think it falls. There's a thing called confirmation bias. We all do it. Basically, confirmation bias says that once we form an opinion on something, we seek out and we interpret information that supports that prior preconception. And so what happens, it can be deadly to new product development. Hey, I think customers want this. And if we stay in the qualitative mode, I'll give you a quick example. Let's imagine I told all my colleagues that our new product will succeed if it has better abrasion resistance. I go out and I do half a dozen interviews. Nobody mentions abrasion resistance. None of the customers mention it, except on the very last interview, I say, is there anything else you want? And the customer goes, well, maybe, I don't know, abrasion resistance. Oh, good, thank you. Now I prepare my PowerPoint presentation for the boss. Guess what shows up in 72-point bold Arial font? They want abrasion resistance. The customer said it, right? So unless we have a way of using the language of math where we can get those customer needs unadulterated, unfiltered, unbiased directly to us, we're going to fall into this and other similar problems that we run into. So I think people recognize that when they can actually prioritize quantitatively, they avoid that. I think the other element is this. They go out and they do just helter-skelter VOC and they end up with 36 needs. They just don't know what to work on. And they're like, what do we do? So I think for those two reasons, that's why the prioritize came up. Not in the fact that it's not being done by very many people.
Yeah, fabulous, Dan. Thank you. And actually, there's a question that popped up that aligns with another one that I had ready. So let me pose this one to you. Firstly, they were saying thank you very much for the webinar and the helpful presentations. So that was good. The question is, in a B2B context and the importance to think more globally, especially for small firms, would you advise companies to extend the VOC competencies to the rest of the stakeholders?
So good question. To the rest of the stakeholders, I'm wondering if they're talking about stakeholders in the ecosystem. Well, I'll answer it this way. You should, in your company, involve your marketing and your commercial and your technical people, okay? So commercial would be marketing, sales, product management. Technical would be chemists, some software developers and so forth. So get all of your people on the interviews on your side. On the customer side, I apologize. On the customer side, you want to also get anybody who will make or influence decisions for that company. So you might be talking to operations. Yeah, purchasing might be there, but marketing hopefully will be there. Management will be there. Their technical people. So all of those stakeholders at the customer. And then finally, within the broader, that's within the company, your customer company. But then more broadly speaking, you also want to interview people who are not your existing customer today, perhaps your customers' customers, perhaps regulators, other industry experts, other influencers. So it's pretty broad from you to your customer account and into the entire market. If that didn't quite get it for the questioner, please hit me with that again, okay?
Okay, thanks very much, Dan. Patrick, I've got a question that perhaps you can pick up on. This is, some of the newer solutions may solve customers' needs and create mutual value, but might not have complete competitive advantage. How do you defend the market position against your competitor, assuming services and solution are the key differentiator?
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, very interesting question. If we are designing a new value proposition that is based on services and putting that into a market that is predominantly consuming products, that itself changes the game a little bit. You start becoming a bit more disruptive, and you are bringing to the conversation, you're bringing a solution that is talking about the outcome that the product can achieve instead of what the product specifications are. And this is something we have seen in many businesses, is where there are several competitors coming in from lower cost perspective, or where they have the best product out there at the lowest cost. At such points, it is very difficult for manufacturers to come in with premium products and say, no, but our product is going to last longer. If the customer's pains are very much about CapEx, your solutions are not going to solve that. This is where the service element is going to provide you a competitive advantage, because you are no more having a discussion on CapEx versus OpEx, or how I can reduce both of them for you. But instead, you are looking at how can I make your business more successful? How can I improve the performance of your entire process over the lifetime? And that is where I think the competitive advantage truly sits. I'm just reading the question back if I've missed anything. Assuming services solutions being a key. Yes. So, and even within the service sector, if there are services being offered by the competitors as well, you might have the first mover advantage, as the person stated. Yes, and in order to protect that first mover advantage, we have found it much easier in the service business to protect a competitive advantage than in a product business, because services tend to be not very tangible and, of course, very difficult to replicate. The service experience is what differentiates you, and no service experience is the same to somebody else's. And I think that's why services tend to be more driving more competitive advantage.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. There's a lot in there, and obviously I've popped some of the guides on the screen just for people to be aware that they can get support and help. Obviously with Dan through the AIM Institute as well. Dan, this is one for you. Could you explain a bit more about how best to let the customer lead the interview, please?
Oh, yeah, great. Thank you. Because I did kind of jump over that, didn't I?
Yeah.
So imagine we're doing an interview with a paint producer, and again, we make, paint ingredients. So what we do is we start with maybe 2 or 3 real easy questions, icebreakers. Can you tell us about your competitive advantages, or something? Just doesn't really even almost matter what the question is, just something that they're going to be the expert, they're the master and we're the student. Just kind of warm them up. That's it. Okay. That shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. Then what you do is you display a bunch of yellow sticky notes up on a screen or in a Zoom or a Teams call. And you say, great, listen, we're here. We don't have any preconceived notions about, what it is you want to get fixed. So we're not here to sell you something. We're not here to solve anything. We're here to understand what your needs are so we can do a better job of solving them, okay, later. So if you will, Mr. Customer, tell us, give us an example. What is the typical problem you guys are running into? Now, if you've warmed them up, they will always have a problem, okay? So they say, well, we're not getting enough hiding power. Now, this is where the probing methods come in, what and why. You ask them what questions. Well, in what conditions is the hiding power not good enough? How often do you see this problem? Where do you see this problem? Could you describe that a little bit more when you say the high? So we ask what questions. Then we move into the why question. We say, well, how does that impact you? Who does that impact? What's the disadvantage? So we ask them why questions. And then we say, is there anything else I should know about this hiding power? I think you guys got it. Great. Let's move to the next sticky note. What other problems are you having? Now, this sounds bizarre, and I've talked to VOC experts that don't believe this will work. But if it's a B2B company, we've done this, again, with thousands of teams, and tens of thousands of interviews have been done by them. They have problems. And once you're attentive and you're listening and you're really engaged, they will move on and keep giving you more problems. Now, if they run out of problems, you say, well, that was great. Let's move to these green sticky notes. What would your ideal world look like? Maybe it's not a problem, but you'd love to see this. And you get more outcomes on this thing. Then you show them a trigger map and you get more outcomes. Now, here's a part I want to get to on the leading the interview. When they finish up that little sticky note on hiding power, and you said, what other problems are you having? Do you, the supplier, have any idea at all what they're going to say? You don't. The customer is leading the interview. Now, what happens when you do this? I know it sounds weird, but this is how they really get engaged. They just keep going. They're doing almost all the work and they like it. And again, for consumers, it would probably run out pretty quickly. but your B2B customers have got high knowledge, interest, objectivity, foresight, and so forth. I hope that helps a little bit.
It does, Dan, and I think it's very contextual as well, because it depends on that relationship between you and your potential customer. We've had another question from Ian Machin, and this is quite an interesting one, Dan. This is about how to stop something happening. How would you advise interviewers to respond to the customers in the customer visits who have identified a job to be done and they want the visitor to start solving or committing to solve it?
Great.
Well,
first of all, I love the job to be done notion. In fact, even preferably, we would identify the job to be done that the customer is interested in. If you think about a really good front-end process, think 3 levels: market segment, job to be done, outcomes. So in other words, when you go, I mean, you could do voice of customer every day. In fact, we have a whole course for that too. But let's say you're doing it for new product, new service development. You really want to identify a market segment because that's defined as a cluster of customers with similar needs. And you don't want to design a product for people who have got different needs, right? So we'd identify the market segment. Then you want to identify as best you can the job to be done they're doing. You don't want to just go interview all car companies and say, what do you want to talk about? Identify, it's the dashboard, it's the body trim, it's the battery, whatever, right? So you get the job to be done. And then within that, you go on all these outcomes. Now, the other part of that question was really good. What if they want to start solving? So what we recommend is you set this interview up and say, hey, listen, our goal is to solve, but we would rather not start solving until we understand what you want us to work on. So bear with us a little bit. Let's have an intelligent conversation. And if you set it up the right way and they realize you've prepared, you got sticky notes, it's visual, you know what you're doing, you're facilitating, they'll be just fine with that. And then just remind them, you're going to come back and share some results of your industry research. You'll keep them posted, but now you're going to work on what they want you to work on instead of what you think they want you to work on. So that's how you get them out of this solving and selling mode at that point.
Fabulous, Dan. Thank you. And back to you, Patrick, if I may. Do you have any good practice that you could share about how you ensure that you align market need with service design?
Yes, that's very interesting. It brings me to introduce another framework. However, it might not be something that I put on the screen today, but we spoke about customer value propositions and how they are designed. Piggybacking on the design and the pains and gains we identify, we have a process called business model blueprinting, which helps you craft an entire business model driven by those pains and gains. And in order to link those pains and gains to service design, we break those down into 3 categories of what are the contracted outcomes you will provide to address those pains and gains, under what conditions will you provide those contracted outcomes, and while putting those conditions in place, what are the risks you are still willing to accept that things might go wrong, but not at a scale that would entirely jeopardize your business model. And this business model blueprint tool itself can really help businesses visualize and understand how those pains and gains are driving an entire business model, because it starts with the segment's pains and gains, then the contracted outcomes, conditions, and risks, and then takes you into the other 3 quadrants that we spoke about early on in the presentation. And I think that could be an entire topic of conversation for a webinar. But for those who want to have a look at the business model blueprint, we have some links in the chat function. You can follow it on our website and you'll find those there as well.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I dropped the business model blueprint.co.uk into the chat because you'd picked up with Dan, obviously, on the segmentation piece, and that was what reminded me about it. Dan, some more questions coming in for you. I'm delighted. Insightful presentations. Thank you all. Could Dan give some examples of how to weave in advanced probing techniques in customer interviews, please?
Yes. Yeah. The advanced probing techniques are, we call it what, why, clarify. So when you get a customer give you a problem or something you'd like to see in their ideal world, we want to think outcome. Well, how do we really probe that thoroughly? So the first thing we do, we hit the what questions. Great what questions are, can you describe that problem for me a little bit more? Let's go back to the hiding power of paint for a minute, okay? Can you describe that for me? That may sound like a weak question. It's incredibly powerful. It lets a customer go wherever they want to go. Then you find out, well, where do you see that problem? When do you see that problem? When you see this problem, how often do you see this problem? Those are the sort of questions we get in the what. And then we go into the why. And the why questions are, well, how does that impact your business? How does that impact you? Who does it impact? And 40 years ago, somebody told me, Dan, if you want to learn something, ask questions of observation, implication, application. I really like that. Observation, implication, application. So the what questions are observation questions. The why questions are implication questions. We're going to stay away from the application questions because that would get us into solution space. We don't want to do that. After you do the what, why, we do the clarify. Now, the clarify is where we create something called an outcome statement. We say, are you saying you want to minimize the see-through of the initial paint or surface through the paint, or are you saying you want to minimize the frequency when people can see through? The hiding power is sufficient. You try to clarify this with the customer. Only the customer knows. And it's always starting with a verb, unit of measure, object, minimize time required to do this, maximize likelihood that. So you get that outcome statement crafted, you test it with the customer in the interview. And if they go, yeah, that's right, then you go, great. What other problems are you having? Now, when you do this, you're going to end up with your interview, you're going to have these crisp outcome statements where you absolutely understand what's been happening. And then you're going to have, maybe you did 6, 8 interviews qualitatively, right? Now you're going to have dozens and dozens of outcomes. And what you're going to do is select the ones that came up the most often with the most intensity. You'll take maybe 10, 15, 20 of those. That's what you'll do your quantitative preference interview on. And you'll say, how important was scrub resistance on a scale of 1 to 10? And how satisfied were you on a scale of 1 to 10? Generally going back to the same customers. Not always, but generally.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps if I can stick with you, Dan, before I hand over to Parikshit. We've got a question from Bart from the Netherlands, and he's saying, hi, Dan, do you have some recommendations about how do you go about hearing the voice of the customer's customer?
Oh, very good. Yes. So in many cases, it makes sense to go to the customer's customer. Not always, though. Here's the thing. As suppliers, we can only do 2 things broadly for our customers. We can help them with their product, and we can help them with their process, okay? So in the case of the paint producer, we could help them with both. We could help them line out and lean out their process, make it easier to add our ingredients. But really, we're going to impact their product, right? Hiding power is in their product. Scrub resistance is in their product. So a general rule of thumb is this. There's 4 groups of B2B producers: materials, components, equipment, and services. If you are making materials or components, you'll probably find that your product is inside their product and you'll impact their product. That's when you want to go down the value chain. If you are maybe only impacting their process, though, there's no point to go down, So how do you do it? The best way is go to your customer, do some really good interviews, engage them, and then when they see that this is safe, you say, this is wonderful. You've given us a lot of information. Hey, listen, we can go talk to your customers and we can feed back some anonymized, generalized industry research. Can you recommend anybody we should talk to? It's often, depending upon the industry, wise to do that, because if you leapfrog your customer and they don't know what you were doing and why you were doing it, it can upset some customers.
Okay. Really helpful, Dan. And Parikshit, we've got about 20 seconds left. Any final tips you'd like to share?
I think just the last one, the question I saw from Nikhil, that are there any other challenges after these things have been figured out? Very few challenges that we see once the value proposition has been done rightly. But after that becomes the challenge of delivering the value propositions. And at that point, especially in B2B, in advanced services, the next challenge is, can we do it ourselves or do we need to work with other partners? Product-led businesses tend to have this very proud feeling that we do everything ourselves, which can be a strength, but often can be a hindrance to their progress as well. So keep that in mind when you think of delivering, is you don't have to do it yourselves. Stick to your competencies, create a network, and that could be a better way.
Yeah, I'm delighted to see your passion, Parikshit. That was the longest 20 seconds ever. Dan, can we just thank you for your insight, for sharing your knowledge and experience. It's been a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank
I believe
you.
we're going to do something reciprocal with you in a couple of weeks. So
Yes.
thank you, Dan. Parikshit, as always, thanks for your insight and observations from your industrial practice. And to our delegates, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Ian.
Bye now. Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.